Today is December the 4th, I believe, 2015. My name's Ennis Barbery Smith, and we are interviewing Charlie Marshall. We have Estelle Elliott and Donna Leonard with us as well. So, Charlie.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone involved for having thoughts to, give me the opportunity to come in and talk and explain about things that I did growing up. And actually, I thought of it as Charlie's story. And Charlie's story is something that pretty extensive, no different than other people, but I had opportunities to do things.
So when and where were you born?
Well, for us, at that period of time, we had, either, people who lived on the island were born right in a house and had midwives. I think that's what they were called. But at the time, Mom went to the hospital, Salisbury. So I was born in Salisbury. And I'm sure she was probably born here on the island. With her sister and her sisters and my Uncle Ed and Aunt Annie and all, Aunt Louise. I'm sure they were probably born here on the island. But as time went on, Mom had the opportunity, and then Salisbury is where I was born.
What year?
The year I was born was November 22nd, 1953. But being born, I've been told that didn't matter. I was born in Salisbury, not born on the island. I still feel, that I'm still, people say, I'm a Chincoteague.
Well, yeah, your family lived here. It's not like they were living somewhere else either.
Always starts with your parents. And mine, my parents, my grandparents, and included in that, there were so many other people around me at the time, my friends and their parents. And growing up on the island, everybody, we were as a family. Everyone knew each other and looked out for each other. And my grandparents, who I give credit to also, started they were the people who were responsible for my mom and for me and other members of my family. We sort of originated, my granddad originated from Snow Hill, and my grandmother was originally from the island, Chincoteague Island. And the thing where I get lost, because there's so much where they're gone and we've lost that segment of our origin, that the piecing things together through the years has been a little difficult. It was Cliff Taylor and Estelle Taylor, and she was originally a Marshall, as I'm a Marshall now. Estella Taylor, we called her Stell Taylor, but she was a Marshall. Her dad was George Marshall. Through a period of time, they were here on the island. And then my grandfather moved from Snow Hill, and somehow he met my grandmother, and they lived here for years. Started out as probably some of the original black folks, African Americans here on the island. And I would imagine the roots probably went back to either slaves or free slaves, from the period as we go with that era that happened. But through the years then, Mom, she married my father, who was Charles Marshall. They called him or nicknamed him Wilbur. And Dad was from Horntown, and so their roots go back over Horntown also.
So Cliff Taylor and Estelle Taylor, they had your mother, and what was her name?
Oh, maiden name? Well, she would have been a Marshall. Maiden name was Taylor.
What was her first name?
I didn't mention her name. Mabel.
Mabel. Okay.
But those, my parents, from Dad, who was Charles E., and I'm Charles E. the Third, and because his dad was named Charles, and as I said, their family, were from Horntown, and then met Mom, who was Mabel Marshall, and through the years, Dad pulled up roots and married Mom, and we were here on the island. And through the years being on the island, I was young, and there are things I remember, and that everything's changed so much here on the island. And back during the period when I was growing up, not a lot of black folks, not a lot of African Americans, and most of them have died out. And I'm probably one of the oldest at the period now of original, because I wasn't born on the island, but I grew up, all my life, I spent, here on Chincoteague Island. And I had other members of Mom had other siblings, and there would have been my Uncle Ed Taylor, and there would have been my Aunt Annie, which would have been, she married Savage, and that was Annie Savage, and Costin Savage. There would have been as I said, my Uncle Ed, and Uncle Ed married a lady by the name of Dorothy, and she's still alive. My Aunt Dorothy is still alive. She lives down in Bayside near Nancock. And then there would have been my Aunt Louise, and she was a Navy person. Her husband, they traveled, and I remember her husband was George. That would have been my Aunt Louise. They lived for a period of time in California, and believe it or not, my cousin, who's named George, also from that family, tells me my Uncle George that married my Aunt Louise, and they were whites. It was George White. He's still alive. But through the years, I haven't had a chance to visit. He's in Oklahoma, and I haven't had a chance to go see him, and I guess his health is still good enough. But I remember them visiting us all the time. And over at Wallops, the Navy had, for years, I remember something about that he was working or stationed at Wallops. But that goes back so far.
And how about the Logans?
Also from other people that live nearby, not a lot of blacks, but we lived off of Taylor Street, and there was one other family that lived behind us that I grew up with, and that they would have been the Logans. And out of it, the siblings from that family, there would have been Carolyn Logan, and she's still alive. She works here on the island. She still works on the island, but not living on the island, but she works here. She had two other sisters. There was Linda Logan, and Josephine Logan. And they lived behind us from where my grandfather had built a house. And I call him Pop. When I say Pop, I'm talking about my granddad, because he lived earlier just off of Chicken City Road before he built a house.
And that was Cliff Taylor?
Cliff Taylor.
Okay.
My grandfather, Cliff Taylor, had lived off of Chicken City Road and then built a home off of Taylor Street. And we were there were other blacks that were on that street at that time also. There would have been Clarence Marshall, and he was related, a cousin or somewheres in there. They called him Bummy. I remember that. That was a nickname. He was a truck driver. He and his family were on the island. A number of other blacks that lived on the island. I could, some of them, it goes back through the years and it gets difficult to remember many of them. Some of them, like the Knox family, and there would have been many, many more.
How do you spell that? Knox? Is it
Knox.
K-N-O-X? Okay. I wasn't sure.
Because there would have been Marvin and Marvin Knox. This time, his mother, that family, it goes back. I was so young, but out of it, the lifestyle here was everyone, if they weren't watermen or poultry industry, for people to do to for financial.
Shuck oysters.
Yes, oysters too. When I mentioned the poultry and the watermen, I remember I've told people when I moved away about what family did as watermen. And I remember in school, I wrote a paper when I was in college, and it was, it talked about the watermen. And out of that, people had no thought of what that consisted of. But Mom shucked oysters. And I remember at the Shreves, when she would go to work mornings, I was young enough, didn't have babysitters. And she would take me, because I was young then. I was, I don't think my brothers and sisters were born at that time then. It was close. And she'd take me with her in the mornings, early in the morning. And I remember sitting up on the, they have these long shelves, and they'd have all the oysters stacked up on the shelves, and she shucked oysters. And I remember sitting there, through the morning, and as a period that she was working, because she couldn't have me ramble off, because, she wouldn't find me drowned. There were just the docks there, so I had to, sit there and endure that as she was working.
And she worked at the Shreves Brothers Oyster House.
Yes.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yes, it would have been the Shreves Brothers.
And where was
the time? So I remember it was down off of Main Street, and there's a motel there now. I think, I'm not sure, where the, just down from the dairy.
Okay.
The Dairy Dream, Dairy Queen, I think we called it, that used to be there years ago
On Main
off
Street?
the dock.
The Dairy Dream was Lee Savage's ice cream shop.
Ah.
Oh, and where was that?
Well, there were shucking houses all along there. It's right beside Don's.
Oh,
now.
okay. So maybe this
What
would
is
have
now
been
Little
your
Whippies. Was the Dairy Dream, but there were oyster houses all along Main Street.
Yeah. But she did that, as I was getting to a period where she didn't have to babysit me and worry about me.
What did your dad do? You talked about your mom shucking oysters for Shreves Brothers. What did your father do usually?
Father also, Dad graduated from, at the time it would have been, he graduated from high school from on the county, down the county. I think it was Murray Nottingham Smith. It's called T.C. Walker from years ago, or now T.C. Walker, but Murray Nottingham Smith was a high school. That's where all the African Americans or blacks went to school. Dad graduated from there. Spent some time military. He was a Korean vet. And when he returned back, and then he and Mom married, Dad worked then on the water. Dad was a waterman. And he loved the water. And that inspired me too, being on the water. We go fishing, and I'd be there with Dad days as he's clamming and oystering, and those things just, it's still in my memory steadfast of our history, our culture.
You've told me before that your grandmother and grandfather, I think, were hunting guides and would go up the bay, and one would cook and one would guide the people around.
My granddad, at some period in time, Cliff Taylor, that would have been a period when, instead of tourism, there's always been hunting, fishing has been something that brought the economy, helped the economy on the island. And it was work also for people. And my granddad, Cliff Taylor, would do guides up the bay for the hunters that were duck hunters. They would also go to the called the hunt lodges, and grandmother would cook. Pop would, my grandfather, I still call him Pop. They would he'd clean the birds, after they'd bring them in, and they would do meals to feed those hunters. And I remember them talking about that. I then learned about what that entailed through the years in my future career and history of this area and other areas. And that was means how people lived. They were able to survive. That was income for them. Mm-hmm. But out of grandparents and family, the other thing that I too was aware of what other people here on the island, what they were doing to survive wasn't much. And then I saw a change. There was a period that the island just seemed to overnight, it changed. There were people. We changed from a small barrier island coastal region of everybody knowing each other, and then tourism industry came in, and that changed much for us. There are pros and cons for it. The pros, because everything was so basic and simple, survival here for everyone. With the tourism, it helped people to be able to better their lives. And I look back on that, change has to come. And I didn't like it at first. And we have to go along with what occurs. And I'm not a very religious person, and I feel that God had a purpose for how He wanted things to turn out. My home, where I grew up, and I thought of this place as my own. I'm sure everyone else did, but we at a certain point we were sharing it with other people. But one thing about sharing it, this island, we were proud of what we were about and how we grew up. And then I remember so much the growing up of the Taylor Street gang. And, we didn't have much to do, when we were growing up, but we were outdoors constantly. And there, at that period, there was always, we had wooded areas, and I come home anymore and nothing anymore. All of the timber, the places where we go and the trails and play all day long just out in the timber, and the people who did that from the Taylor Street gang were people like Gary Shreves, also Brian Tarr, and one of my best friends that he and I were always out in the timber, in the little marsh areas and glades. We called them glades. Mm-hmm. And that would have been Greg Holloway. And he had a nickname, called him Sugar Bear. And he and I were he was the one that, he was my constant buddy, to my person I'd play with we'd play out, just he and I exploring, the outdoors around us, and that was so much fun with him. After that, we gained interest in sports, and from all of the Taylor Street gang, at the end of Taylor Street in Maine, there's a cemetery, and behind that cemetery on Main Street in Taylor, we'd all get together afternoons, baseball, through the whole summer, or when I would be returning from school. And I remember the time, as I'm going to explain also about the school, is that I had to go to the mainland. Schools were not integrated at the time. Yeah. So the school that I attended when I started, it was an elementary school, and it was in Wattsville. And it was near where the Dream Drive-In, just a 2-story building, sit back in a field. And blacks from Horntown, surrounding area, that's where elementary school was for us. And I'm sure that building is gone. The building, I'm sure, has been long gone. But it was something that after school days, I remember on the bus, everybody would wait for me to get home from school from the mainland, and it would be like everybody. I was on the bus and I go, get me home so I can go get my glove, and get back to play ball. And that was the excitement for me, getting home, and with the Taylor Street gang, Harry Stanley and Gary Shrees and Brian Tarr and other people, and I'd be I was the oldest at the time. I was the only black that was there with everyone. And you know what? I had no idea of what color I was at that time. And I don't think that they did also. I was Charlie. And that was such a neat thing for me growing up. And it continued for me in later years. But the schooling for us through the period, again, before schools were integrated, we were bused to the mainland. And I did that up until 3rd grade. And then at that period then, Mom said, we're going to put you in school here on the island. So 4th grade, I had to first do North Accomack. And they built that school because the other old school, grade school, it was getting to a period where we were advancing. After North Accomack, my 5th grade year, I started school here. And I was so excited because I didn't like getting up 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, to travel to the mainland to go to school. With here, I just walked to school. I knew the shortcuts through all the streets and everyone's backyard. And from that, I started school. My granddad, for sure, Grandpa Cliff, was a very proud black man of what he did. And he was one that everybody knew him and they respected him. And that was something that was different than I'm sure than other places. He could voice things that he saw that he felt that shouldn't occur. He'd voice. And some of the things that he voiced, for example, after I started with starting school, I remember in high school, when the school was integrated. I was first in the school, and it wasn't like it was integrated. The other blacks at the time, the Logans, and there were not many other black families. They were still attending school on the mainland. Pop had a problem with, at first, the busing of other people, minorities, to the island. And I think that was because he knew what had occurred with me and my brothers and sisters as we were taken from our home and traveled distances away to go to school. You know, when you have and you prefer the school right in your neighborhood, you know, where you can walk to school. But out of that, it wasn't that he was not in favor of the people of color being bused, but why put that on them? Getting up early in the morning, traveling, road conditions, you know, in the winter. Sometimes we had some harsh winters in traveling those roads. But that's an example of something that Pop he'd speak out. And I remember the public meeting, and he voiced that. And no one thought that that was wrong for him to voice his concern of the busing to the island. And his concern was, why take these children from where they live, where there's schools there, and bring them this distance away from their home? Because that's what happened to me. I didn't want to leave from my home and travel to the mainland to school. I wanted to be right where I lived. Out of the travel going to school, when I first started, or Mom said, we're going to put you in school here on the island. And she asked me a question. She says, how do you feel with not attending school on the mainland anymore, but going to school here at home on the island? I said, Mom, I'm more than willing at that age, because I don't have now to travel from the mainland on that bus and everybody waiting for me to get home to play ball on Taylor Street. Now I'm right there. We get out of school. We all leave at the same time. They don't have to hold up the game for me to be there, because I'm here now. Just as soon as we get out of school, we're going down that field. We're going to be playing ball, you know, and that explained it to her. She knew from that she was doing the right thing. And that was so neat, because everyone was so happy now that I was in school with them here. And out of that, we were able then to increase what we were doing out on the playground to in school.
So you had siblings too, right? You had
Mhm.
younger siblings. What were their names, and do you remember, you know, what it was like for them too? Did they have to be bused or any of that?
With me being the oldest, I look back, and with Brother Cliff, he always, you know, wanted to follow in my footsteps, and whatever I did, you know, Cliff was right there with me, you know, my brother. Now, Sis was a little younger, because my brother Cliff now, there's only a year difference in us. And Sis, she goes back, she's now, or she's 5 years, I think 6 years, 6 years younger. Sis 6 years younger than myself. And they were also aware of what was occurring for us being on the island. It was the same like myself. We didn't think of whether we were you know, African Americans or black. We were just Chincoteaguers, you know, and I don't think the difference come about until, you know, we were going to school away from here. And that's when things, you know, were different, and realized that it's not the same for us as it would have been for, other blacks. But they grew up, they did things, also Cliff was like me. He followed my footsteps. He liked to do the same things that I did. And Sis was always mama's, little girl. So she did those things that, that I call sissified.
Was that her first name, Sis?
No, it was Timley.
Timley.
It's Timley Marshall.
Timley Marshall.
When I was in grade school, I remember the first time from baseball, someone asked me, they said, "Hey, Charlie, why don't you come out and play Pony League with us or the Little League?" I might have been Little League. And it was the Jesters, David Jester, Maurice Jester. I remember them, and there would have been Brian Tarr and everybody again. And I remember the coach. I don't remember the coach now, but I remember we were my first time playing Little League or Pony League. We got a team together. We were practicing, and there are drawbacks and ups and downs through that era, and bad and good things. We had a team, and we were going to play, and coach called us at one period and said, because Charlie's on the team, we're not going to have season, or we're not going to play. And that was basically someone had issues because I was black at the time. And of course, I was the only black on our team here in the Pony League, the island team, but someone had issues on the mainland teams that we were going to play. We didn't have a league that year. We didn't have a team. We have a team that year. And they could have played without me. But everyone said, if Charlie's not playing, we're not playing. And we didn't have a team that year. The following year, things changed. We had a team. But that was the only time I remember anything like that ever occurring. But that was an era that there were indifferences. People still, there were prejudices that occurred. We here on the island, I was totally unaware growing up of it. Going through school, then for me, I think it encouraged me at that point. I started in middle school, playing, again, organized sports. That prompted me and sort of was like, do your best. And I did that in everything I did, sports, my academics, worked to do the best I could do.
So
Okay.
the year when the Pony League, when they didn't have a team, do you know what year that would have been?
Probably 65.
Maybe 65. Okay.
65, 66. All through the years, sports, for me, it was means to express myself, to reconnect with all the friends that, I grew up with, all my high school friends, because, when you're playing on a team, there are a number of things that come about that mold you as a person, and discipline. One of the things come out of it that helped me was disciplining me. And playing sports started, in high school, and got quite a bit of recognition for what I did, and I was happy that occurred for me. Starting out in the 9th grade, had a chance to start varsity ball, and don't usually start varsity ball, usually in high school. I got to start also, being on the team, and worked hard to achieve and do things. I wanted to win. I'm a winner. Like winning, don't like to lose. And that helped too, because through the years, the recognition, all shore football, all shore basketball. I think my senior year, was all sure football, all sure basketball. Made those two. And of course, I was always playing basketball or running track. Here we were limited, just primary sports. If we'd had any others, I would have been there probably doing it. But it also kept us to where if grades weren't maintained, then, you don't play. And not only through the school, but mom also. Mabel said, you don't keep your grades up, you're not going to play. That helped me though. And of course, in later years in my career and, for working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Do you have, stories that you remember about either, it doesn't have to be about sports, but it could be when you're on a team, just sort of funny or interesting stories that happen, memories that you think of with Chincoteague, and I don't know, playing pranks, or I'm trying to think what some of my high school pranks are.
One of the greatest things I think for me with playing sports on the island, and it's in my 9th grade year, and basketball. We won a district championship. And winning the district championship, we got a chance to do a trip. And that year, the district championship was being held in Williamsburg. And we stayed on the campus of William and Mary. And I remember the first game, and it was, if you lost, you were eliminated. You went home. And I remember the night of our game to play, and I remember the team that we were playing, they were all black. And I was the only black on the team from the island. These fellows come out and everyone jammed the ball. They all dunked. And everyone on my team, there's Harry Booth, Harry Stanley, Jim, some of the fellows now, we were all looking at each other and we knew this is going to be a challenge. And basically it was a challenge because the caliber of what we were playing against, we were just a small team from a little island. And these fellows probably come from a school where there were hundreds and hundreds of kids. And here we are with a school, and the entire school, there's probably 200, maybe 200 students. And they've got hundreds, maybe 1,000, a few thousand. And we were, unfortunately, I hate to say this, we were out-talented. But we had heart, and we were there. And it wasn't discouraging because we knew that we had worked to be there, and we were there to do the best that we could against that challenge. But that is one thing I remember, as a 9th grader, and the sports through the years, it was very competitive, and the thing that it did for me also helped me to keep that connection with my friends that I grew up on Taylor Street, or that street ball that we're playing, it now became something to where it knitted us much more. Mm-hmm. I still need to identify also some of those teachers, my academics. And there are teachers I remember, like Mrs. Connor, when I first started middle school. And I think it was a little difficult for her, to have someone of color in her class. So she was protective of me. She somewhat wanted to be sure that no one did indiscreetly things to cause me harm or to belittle me. So she told me she was protective of me, to be sure that none of the other students did inappropriate things with me in the class. Mr. Enright, I always thought that I don't know why we have to do the things that we're doing in his class. He, in a sense, helped with the articulation of me using correct language. Through the years, I've had to go back and speak to groups and major numbers of people. And from the island, we have some of us had a different dialect and carried over through the years. I lost mine, and it wasn't as pronounced as a lot of other people. Part of it because of Mr. Enright, because I was working for federal government too, and I had to do talks and things through the years. For Mr. Enright, Coach Sawyer Mears. Now when we talk discipline, Coach Mears, he was disciplined. He was like my father, because I lost my father some years back, Wilbur. And then if I had questions about something, and Coach Mears was like my dad, I could go to him personally if I had something I needed to discuss that in my personal life that maybe needed to be corrected, or I needed answers for something. I felt that close to Coach Mears. And I wasn't the only one. Coach Mears would do that with other people also. Out of other teachers, Jay Wesley, Jeffries. Jay was like one of Jay, actually, I had no classes because he was teaching other grades below me. But I could go to Jay, and Jay at times would feel like to me like, I could say things, do things around Jay, and he wouldn't go to the principal on me. I did think of some things here that I thought was neat, and I collected through the years ribbons, high school ribbons from games and achievements and things through the years, some photos of people back through the years, also me, and clippings from out of the newspaper through the years. This is one that's pretty neat. The Queen, I'm not sure the year here, but Donna's sister, Jane Leonard. And I was on the team playing ball at this time, but these are clippings that I did of people, through the years, and I was looking and I go, I've got Jane here in one of the clippings from that I had taken out of the paper. And that's one thing that I prided myself on. Each week I looked at, I go, if I'm not in the paper this week, then we haven't won a game and something's wrong. So whenever we'd win games, most of those games, I'd see clippings, and it wasn't myself all the time in the paper, but that was one of those things, that would be neat, because teachers would come to me, like I've had Mr. Metzler and other teachers later down the road come and question me about why did I look like I was so scared in some of those games, and I would tell them, when you've got someone that's 250 pounds going to pounce on you, eyeballs get, a little open, and, you don't want that 250 pounder pouncing on you. But through the years, this was my pride, playing sports for the Chincoteague, being a Chincoteague pony. I think out of teachers also that I remember, all of them, I should say all of the teachers that worked to educate me and others through the years, I commend them, and I want to give credit not to just one, but all of those teachers, from the Sawyer Mears to the Mrs. Connor to the J. Jeffries, and all of those teachers had a purpose, and I hope they will look upon me as a product of something they did through those years. And I give credit to them too, give credit also back to my family. With the academics, some of those teachers that were important to me, Jack Dukes, he was before Coach Mears, Sawyer Mears. Jack Dukes, and he was the early part of molding me to be an athlete. Beyond Jack and the athletics, I remember Mr. Chrisman in the carpenter shop and the woodwork things we would do, and how he would oversee the things that I put together, because I was not talented as a carpenter or woodworking. And for him, he had patience with me over, my carpentry skills. And then from Mr. Crispin, there's Mr. Gillis. And Mr. Gillis put up with things from us sometimes that he had a heart of gold, and he tolerated us. And he was a person that was very mild-mannered, and he is one also that should be given credit to for his patience to put up with the antics that we did sometimes. Out of the teachers, I keep in touch with some of them through my Facebook. Occasionally, I see a few of them, but as we get older, things have changed there with the teachers that I remember. The school itself, I remember the elementary school, which doesn't exist anymore. And then, we traveled or moved to the high school. I know now, I see the high school is still, they've built on the high school, but it's still the high school that I attended. I tell people that when I graduated, they go, "Well, how many people graduated in your class?" And I said, "Well, the principal of the school was Mr. Phillips, and he had a school attendance of probably a few hundred students. My graduating class now, I think there are probably 40 people in my graduating class. And there have been other schools and people that I tell them that, and they go, wow. They've come out of a school where there's 1,000 students or more, and my graduating class was probably 40 to 50 students. I think 40 of us probably graduated. So it made it very knit close, having a small class like that. Everybody knew each other. Well,
Right.
looks like I'm back to where my roots started for the agency I worked for many of years. Started out working here at the Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge back as a 10th grader in high school, and duties were varied at the time for me. I was just very young and got a chance to really learn a lot about the area here, and give me also a special feeling about natural resources And it then led for me to go into a career working for the National Wildlife Refuge System. Had the opportunity to do something that at my years in high school that a lot of people never had a chance to do. So I was pretty fortunate. I had a number of people who worked with me at that time to also make it happen for me, being an employee with the agency. My first experience was during the summer when one of my Bill Winder, who was Chincoteague High School school teacher and sort of counselor, brought to my attention of a position here, summer position at the Chincoteague Refuge. That refuge, I worked with the maintenance crew, and my supervisor at the time was Other Justice. We called him OD. And OD sort of turned me loose here on the refuge from everything from operating heavy equipment, operating machinery and things that I'd never done before. A lot of outdoor experience. Started to pick up on things that I took for granted. A lot of the wildlife, the bird life here, different animals, mammals, the plants. And it was to a degree to where I felt I had become a caretaker also for this place. And that was just the beginning for me. Through the years after working here at this refuge, starting out as a youth, I finished, started here in 71 and 1971, and then graduated high school in 73, and at that time still working here at the refuge, but they increased my responsibilities at that time. Instead of doing a lot of the play things that I normally would do, operating equipment, driving the trucks and dump trucks and tractors. Started working with the public more and increased the responsibilities for me of what to do. It's giving talks to the general public, bird walks, more oriented programs that the refuge at that time was putting together. So it gave me a chance to develop skills and talents as I then entered college. College years started, I attended Norfolk State University. In addition to that, finished courses at Old Dominion, but got my degree in a bachelor's in outdoor and community recreation. Through the years in school, up until I graduated in 78, those years later all added to my career as I finished college with a degree and to become an employee with the agency. So that worked out very well for me. I remember through the years too, people would joke me about my degree. And in later years of what I studied for, I became an outdoor recreation planner. I became a supervisory outdoor recreation planner. I was also a park ranger. But those years started beginning my graduation of high school. Well, high school and then college. Mm-hmm. And through those years, I learned an awful lot about the resource. And so it was a combination of what everyone needs today in any career. You've got to have that hands-on training, and then you still have to do well in your academics. Starting out here, my first few years, there were people who again influenced. J.C. Apple, who was the refuge manager. It wasn't for J.C. making the choice to have me back also, that wouldn't have happened what's happened for me through the years. And later, working here, there would have been Denny Highland. But with that, most important, the people who I worked with, some of the people who we've lost through the years. Noah Williams, he and I were African Americans. Jeff Marshall, African Americans. And we worked here at this refuge as a team with all of the other people, like Bob Chiricks, the Grover Wilgus, the Corky Collins, so many other people, names I could go on and on. There's still some neat little tidbit things about this refuge that brings back some special memories. Winter times, our winters were never really harsh, but I used to ice skate when I was growing up, and this refuge was one of my favorite spots. Growing up, and we get a good freeze for a period of weeks, and we look forward to that, to come out to the refuge, and they allowed us to do that, ice skating. And you could skate from pond to pond and spend the day just venturing in different regions of the marsh and seeing things. And nights, after finishing the skating through the day, they allowed us to do a bonfire. We could do bonfires. And sitting at a bonfire in the middle of the night with the sounds of the snow geese, in the background. Because it's winter time, there's some ice, but there were still some birds that were around. And the clear sky and the surf, hearing the ocean surf out there. And I've always told people that even after the ice skating days and all here, one thing to remind people of where I came from on this refuge and from the island is that no matter where I've gone, no matter how many refuges, and I'm going to give a view of refuges else where I've worked, but I tell everyone from each of those regions one thing that I will never forget about where I originated from, and that was that salt water still in my blood, that beach sand still in my shoes. And I've used that for years to explain where I've come from. But from here, career continued. My next leg in that career advancement continued. And from here, my next adventure, I call them an adventure. My next adventure ended up taking me to an unknown place called the Great Dismal Swamp. And that's located in southern Virginia, borders North Carolina. It's very vast, 400,000 acres. And with the map, you could still get lost.
I bet you could.
And that's the vastness of the swamp. It was much different than growing up and being on a barrier island and there from the black bear to the canebrake rattlesnakes. Birds did not change though, for sure. The migratory birds all stay the same. Waterfowl to your woodland birds, those things stayed the same, but the other things made it very interesting. We moved, we stayed at that location for 4 years, 3 to 4 years. Through those years from leaving from the island, from the Great Dismal Swamp, so many different regions, and I started out in Region 5. Region 5 was one of the regions to where I never thought I'd leave out of it, but it did occur. And working in the region, I left from the Great Dismal Swamp and had a chance to go to, for the first time, and work in a big city, Philadelphia, the Tennessee National Environmental Center. Believe it or not, we had a refuge in Philadelphia, the Tennessee Marsh near the airport. was only about 1,000 acres, not 400,000 acres, but 1,000 acres. But it was very meaningful because it was also a stopover for birds migrating, and we had wildlife there. You wouldn't think that, but there were deer and squirrels and some of the similar things that you would find in any outdoor setting. Out of leaving from there or working there, a number of people who also the manager, Nugent, Mr. Nugent was very responsible, and this person who I worked for as a manager there, Dick Nugent. Staff there, and from everywhere as I've gone, I tried to keep them in mind from each location, from where I moved from. You become family, and sometimes it's tough when you leave from a location. You get pretty close to people. Mm-hmm. But career advancement, you have to move. It's almost like the military. Leaving from Philadelphia, it was quite exciting to be in a city, and then there was an opportunity to move further. Never had been north like anything. Great Lakes was my next stop, and traveled to the Great Lakes in 1988. It was about 88. It was off of Lake Erie, and that the refuges up there quite different because off that lake, weather tends to get a little cold. I never experienced before 20 below in weather. And at Ottawa, that was the type of weather we'd get in the winter sometime off of Lake Erie, the snow. And all refuges, again, are similar. And the primary reason as an employee that I was there was, first of all, to help manage the resource. I'm there as an outdoor recreation planner. My job are educational programs. And that's a challenge in itself there, to be able to work with people of all ages, and especially younger people. We focused on environmental ed programs for young people, and to help them to gain appreciation of their natural resources is something that it's a challenge for people who are doing that, because we take these things for granted. They don't understand that if we're not managing them, protecting them, there are things like the American bald eagle, like a Chincoteague, the Delmarva Peninsula fox squirrel, that used to be endangered. It was for a period endangered. We had a number of things that occur on refuges that are beneficial. You have to deal with the development and issues outside of managing these resources, and that puts so much pressure on staff and makes it at times really difficult to stay on track of managing resources, because people create issues that become something that we have to also take an account for and correct. The Great Lakes at Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge did something else also for me. Working with the people up there, like the Charlie Blairs, and was one of the managers I worked with a period up there. But in 1988, Mike Tansey, the manager, sent me to law enforcement school. In addition to law enforcement school, got a chance to attend the Refuge Academy, and that's an honor in itself. And it was held then in Nebraska. Got a chance to go to Omaha. We were near Omaha for the Refuge Academy the year that I did it. It was in 1988. that same year, I was traveling again to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. So that year, they tried to get as much training under my belt as possible. And I agreed with them on that. I wanted to get as much so that then I could be, it enabled me to be more efficient. And diversity is the other side of what we work to do in managing resources. Same thing with employees. Gotta be diversified. The Refuge Academy was quite unique. It's down in Glencoe, Georgia, and I graduated in that class as the only African American, and it was 901 PT was the class, and that's police training. The training allowed me also to do more for the refuge resources. There are bad things that happen out there sometimes, and we have to regulate, and you need someone who can legally and be official to protect resources and people also, public. And I'm not a person at that time that was just put there to protect people, but resources also. You know, we focus and make sure we do things to help the resource. From out of Glencoe, Georgia, working my law enforcement, so much training through the years, but then it was time to move on again after working at Ottawa. Got a chance to come back home, close to home, and I was in Virginia. Transferred over, got a position down in Virginia Beach, Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge. Down beginning of the Outer Banks, brought me back to an island again. And what I enjoyed getting back to an island again, and I had my law enforcement, was on a beach. Now we didn't have the 30-some miles of beach like was available to me at Chincoteague, but I had 10 miles or more of beach, and to be able to get on a beach in a four-wheel drive in the middle of the night, here in that ocean, driving down the beach and finding possibly loggerhead sea turtles. Then from that, you know, all types of pelagic birds and things that you just never, you wouldn't expect you would see. And that was all a part of that job. That was the reward for being there, for what I was doing. 4 years back at the beach, and then it was time to go again. I think Mrs. Linda, my wife Linda, bless her soul, she put up with all those years when I'd say, I'm ready to go again. And she'd pack and we'd go. And for sure, we decided we're going to move again. Wasn't home anymore, Virginia. Decided I wanted to go back out in Region 3 in the Midwest. And I did. We packed. Got an offer for a position at Squaw Creek National Wildlife Refuge in Missouri. Right off of the Missouri River, and sat almost in the corner, southwest Missouri. We had, I think about 100,000 acres, maybe 100,000 acres. Mostly managed wetlands. A lot of birds, more birds than I'd ever seen anywhere. Snow geese migration we had one summer. You look in the sky and the flights of snow geese just never ended. Set a record back in probably 2000, 2010, 2011. 2 million birds. Never seen anything like that. 2 million snow geese. And when they take flight, sun is just blocked out. And the sound, it's deafening. And to be there, to see that, it's just very awing.
Yeah.
And then the eagles, more bald eagles than I've ever seen before. It sometimes was like being up in Alaska. You have 300-400 bald eagles. You have 40-50 sitting in a tree as you drive by. They're just eyeballing you. And that's a sight that you just don't forget.
Yeah. So you've stayed in that area. Why did you decide to stay in that area?
After working there, I felt that it was time to throw out anchor. And we decided to buy a home. Be in that direction. I was center of the country. If I want to go to the West Coast, I could go to the West Coast. I could get over to the East Coast, wherever, north, to the lakes, south to the Gulf. There's many directions it could go. And I was sort of like center of everything. And then the area was just so different, it grew on me. And I at a point, there was a point where you look at location, where you are, your life, and it becomes like you have to make a decision, and felt at that point I didn't want to move. Home meant a lot, but my family, my immediate family, parents, they were all gone. Relatives, most of my relatives were gone. And just friends, the friends are always there. But your roots, my roots had gone, that had been the reason for me to be who I am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my family at that time, people at that refuge, and I've got photo here of that family. When you work on a national wildlife refuge, you get pretty close, everybody. You become close. And it's tough when you do leave from one location. It was tough when I left from here, from Chincoteague, to go further elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But those families are going to be your family for the rest of your life. And no matter where you go, there are people still keep in touch with.
How did you first meet your wife, Linda? When did you meet her? When did that happen?
One of the greatest things of working on the refuge also was how I met my missus. She was working a program through a summer, and I also. And she worked for the refuge for a number of years. She was one of our visitor contact station employees. And after a few years, then the position for her ended. But we still continued to date. And in 1980, I was still here at Chincoteague. We decided to tie the knot in 1980. So just as of a few weeks ago, November the 22nd, as I mentioned earlier, my birthday, 35 years. It was our anniversary also. But Leonard and I have been married for 35 years, and she has been the person that she's seen me in periods of pure turmoil, from either something that occurred in my law enforcement that didn't set right with me, that kept me in, thoughts of maybe I shouldn't be with this agency, sometimes things are bad, and I don't want to go into and have to be specific,
That's
you
okay.
know. And then there are those times when those reports become like, oh, they're not going to quit, you know. And you find yourself spending more time in that office completing those reports than being out there in that field. And those are the things that are part of the job. It all comes along with the job. But she would listen to me when I would come in at the end of the day, and I'm just telling her all of those things that I hated through the day. And I was probably sounding like, you know, a cranky old person that needed, especially these last few years before I retired, cranky old person anymore. And out of that crankiness, I got through 36 years or 37 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and working also at the places I told you, all my still in my heart, my home. Chincoteague is especially, you know, in my heart. And I bring back some things sometimes that make me feel good, and people gave me something when I retired, my retirement days, and I like what they put together in this little album, and you may get a chance to get some
Take
of these
pictures of
transfers, some of these
Pictures.
photos from out of here.
That's great.
I sort of it's not a combination of all the years, but from my last station, and that's 15 years that I stayed at my last station. So almost half of my career, you know, half of my career was mostly in the Midwest. And then I am going to do this. I am still, my heart is with Fish and Wildlife Service, but after this year, I'm not going to forget this. You know, I will not forget what those fellows in blue did. Exciting.
So, the flood of 62, you said you have some vague memories.
One of the most serious things that ever happened, and I thought, I was young at that time. I thought it was exciting. Never been in a flood before, and the flood of '62 was a March storm, and at the time I was probably just in grade school, and we lived actually above a chicken house. It was like a little small, but we call them bungalows, I guess, here at home back in the years. And we were up high from the flooding, and of course other people like my grandparents and all, their house were, you know, everything's flooded. I remember Dad in his boat going and finding people in trouble, and, you know, getting them in the boat. Because we were up above water, people were at our house. They came, Dad would pick them up in the boat, and they'd come to the house where we were living up above water. As I said, it's up above a chicken house. And people stayed with us until we were evacuated, you know, off the island.
Where was that house located?
Off of Taylor Street. My house where we lived in was just down on Taylor Street. Everything there now has all changed. There's a motel. I think that's there now, and no more chicken houses. No.
You remember any other big storms or storms that you remember growing up, or 62 was pretty much the big one?
That was probably the biggest event, you know, as far of that caliber. You know, here our weather usually was nothing. Well, we get the hurricanes, and you get minor flooding, but that flooding occurred, and it was, I think we had water for, I want to say a week or more. I remember boats that had washed out of the inlet from the Chincoteague Inlet and the bays there, the Chincoteague Bay, and we're on Main Street. I mean, big fishing boats, you know. But when you have a storm of that caliber at that time, yep, that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably the worst of any, you know, natural disaster that I can remember, any event. We were again pretty fortunate in this area for weather, and that too probably reason why we get people here like something during the year also. It's like almost year round you can visit here.
All right, I guess that's it. Do you have anything else you want to say before we?
Boy, you know, there probably would be, and but
there's
sometimes like I'm going, no, I'm really stretching it right now.
That's okay. We'll stop.
There's something that occurred that people are unaware of that happened on the 22nd also. 62, 63, 63, we lost a president. And I remember President Kennedy, JF Kennedy. And I remember when that happened, I was so young, and we were in that 2-story elementary school in Wattsville in the mainland. And I think I was probably in the 3rd grade when that happened. And I think we had TV then. I'm trying to remember. It was in black and white. And they brought us in to let us know that that happened. And the feeling of that, I think that was something in my lifetime, was one of the things when you mention tragic things that I can piece back and remember in my growing up experience.